Daryl Dixon had a lot riding on it, and I'm not just talking about Norman Reedus. I would like to apologize. This is the 5th spin-off series for The Walking Dead, along with being the second one to air since the main show's finale. The first one since then was Dead City, a show that followed Maggie and Negan. It was a show that was visually stunning with some of the best looking set pieces, lighting, and cinematography that this franchise has ever seen. Unfortunately, the writing is what made this show fall flat on its face. Its very premise did not work because it relied on forcing an already tired dynamic between these two that had supposedly been resolved in the main series. I had assumed that they'd be forced to join together to take on a common enemy or something, but instead they're just retreading all the same plot points that we already went through in The Walking Dead. Daryl Dixon could have easily been doomed to a similar fate had they gone with their original plan of making this a Daryl and Carol spinoff. Now hear me out, I love Carol, but also I was getting sick of her in The Walking Dead. She eventually hit a point where she was just repeating the exact same character arc over and over again. It did make sense for her character to repeatedly spiral into self-destructive behaviors, but the main problem was the show would dedicate so much runtime into just making us watch that happen to her, without offering anything new to say about it. Oh, isn't it so crazy and sad how messed up Carol is? Really dwell on that for 45 minutes. That was a lot of those episodes. Also, Daryl and Carol's relationship in the show was explored pretty thoroughly. They briefly seemed like they might be love interests way back in the prison arc, but over time they decided it best to be besties. They even had a friendship bracelet. But while the things they explored with this duo were rich and dynamic, I don't know what more they could have done from here. I'm not sure what dynamic would be explored in a show with them together that hadn't already been explored in the show that ran for 11 seasons. And I was honestly really relieved when they made the pivot to making this just a Daryl show. I feel like there's so much more that can be explored if he's just on his own. So, with all that being said, the question you came here to learn the answer to: was the show Daryl Dixon any good? Drumroll, please. Yeah, I liked it. Watching the first episode of this show was the nicest breath of fresh air I've ever taken. All my worries about this being another soulless cash grab faded away as I watched this incredibly cinematic tale unfold. Seriously, episode 1 was a surprisingly impressive episode on all fronts, and Dead City should take a bucket full of notes. It's an hour long, but it feels like it just flies by. Daryl washes ashore in France. The set pieces are extravagant. Daryl is being the cool survivalist that he is. The walkers are different here, making them more of a threat. Daryl only speaks English, which makes him an outlier to everyone he meets. This adds a level of instant camaraderie to friendlies he comes across who will adapt to his English, along with another challenge to deal with against any potential enemies that he encounters. Also, so much world building happens so efficiently in this episode. I came to quickly understand and care about this small pocket of the world, particularly this small community of nuns who had managed to survive 12 years of an apocalypse together. I love how alive this world felt. Every random encounter Daryl has feels real. Another big problem with Dead City was ironically how dead the city felt. And by that I mean anytime you encountered groups of people or random characters, they just really felt like they were shoved into the right place at the right time for the story to take place. It didn't feel like how these people would have ended up had the world played out naturally here. In Daryl's show, every encounter he has feels real. Every person, every group, every location feels like it has this rich history of how it got there. And nothing feels out of place or shoved into a spot so Daryl can encounter it at the right time in his story. There's communities, landmarks, hierarchies of power. Everything feels really fleshed out, and even when there's small mystery elements to things, they aren't just leaving information out because they couldn't figure it out. They want to see if you can figure it out before it's revealed throughout the show. Also, the side characters carry significantly more weight than any new characters in Dead City did. Isabel almost instantly becomes incredibly interesting and likable, and you get invested in her story. She seems smart and capable, but at the same time very flawed. And she's holding on to beliefs that we as an audience aren't really sure what to make of. And whether she survives for 3 episodes or 300 billion seasons, she will have made an impact on Daryl and his story, just based off of their first few interactions. interactions. This is that depth I've been looking for. This is that good stuff. And while Isabella's the most notable one, she's one of many interesting side characters that are introduced throughout the show. And they're complemented by interesting antagonists. The first episode establishes their main antagonist, and it's not a comically evil guy. They are motivated by insanity. They actually have real reason to go after Daryl. We see him snap and get sent on the warpath, and although he's doing evil things, it's not out of an evil motivation. He's just a very deeply flawed person. And that's a good antagonist. Not only does the first episode establish the most immediate threat, it also establishes the largest looming overarching one. In Dead City, we found out later that there was someone else at the top pulling all the strings, and she's the mastermind that our main characters will ultimately have to deal with. And she's introduced randomly in the second to last episode, and she's very fond of giving really long dramatic speeches that they were just awful. Not representative of how any real individual would talk ever, no matter how drunk on power or even alcohol that they are.
Bravo.
Comically evil to a T. In Daryl Dixon, when our largest threat starts going on a spiel, it's very quick, intimidating, and to the point. In just a few quick sentences, she's humanized. We've established some backstory for her. We've established her authoritarian presence now. And she's achieved her goal of intimidating the people that she's in charge of while simultaneously intimidating us as an audience. And my favorite part, it was very believable. My sense of disbelief continued to be suspended. Dead City, take notes. Okay, one more big thing that I didn't talk about enough was the action scenes. The action scenes were one of the only things that I praised in Dead City because they were entertaining, but the Daryl Dixon show blew it out of the water in the first episode and then continued to knock it out of the park throughout its runtime. Mostly. These action scenes felt meticulously choreographed and also carried a whole lot of weight to them. Not just in the punches being thrown, but in the actual impact that they would have on the story. Fights begin in ways that make sense, sometimes catching characters off guard, sometimes catching us off guard as an audience, but they always make sense. And there's a lot of weight behind the action happening. Even when nameless characters are getting killed, we're understanding the impact that that's happening on the main characters involved. And everything happens for a reason. Nothing is just happening because it would look cool. They're there to explain something about the world or the situation or the characters that we didn't know before, and we actually learn things throughout the fights, along with progressing the plot through violence, of course. And one other big thing of note is something that Daryl Dixon does in comparison to Dead City that I really like is when people get hurt, like, stabbed or something, they remain injured in the next scene, and it wasn't just all for nothing, it wasn't all for show. Take notes, Dead City. When you stab a character, don't forget about it. And I'm not really praising the show for that one. I guess I'm just saying, yeah, it did the one thing that you should be able to accomplish in fight scene. Can you tell I don't like Dead City? Back to that loser on the drums over there. I'll be spoiling episode 1. I won't be spoiling any major plot points like a character death or something, but it'll be little things, and if you enjoy going into shows blind, then why are you watching this first? Yeah, no major spoilers, but little spoilers here and there until I give a warning when I want to talk about the last episode, in which case I will be doing major spoilers, but you'll have plenty of warning. Don't worry, calm down, you can keep eating. So Daryl's in France. He doesn't want to be in France. He wants to be in America. He's got to get back to America. That's his main goal. And these nuns, particularly Isabel, are like, hey, we can get you on a boat back to America, but you should help us with this kid. This kid is the savior. He's like the second coming of Christ or something. We don't really know. It's a religious situation. Bring this kid across the country for us and we'll get you back to America. Our grizzled main character who's been hardened by an apocalypse has to care for a kid and get him across the country safely. So here's a quote from Greg Nicotero, executive producer for both this show and The Walking Dead. I remember watching the first episode of The Last of Us and going, guys? He's right behind me, isn't he? This show has drawn a lot of comparisons to The Last of Us and even been accused of ripping it off, but I really do think that the concept is about where the similarities end. Yeah, they both have to take a kid across the country, and they both at one point end up torturing a guy to get information out of him to find out where the kid was taken to. But outside of that, the stories play out very differently, and also Joel and Daryl's characters are very different. Joel has to learn to care about Ellie because he was originally just using her as a means to an end. He has an arc arc. Daryl already cares, but he's suppressing that part of himself in order to focus on returning home. He doesn't need to learn to care, he just has to decide to. So yeah, don't worry Greg, I see you. Greg is a zombie veteran. If you can think of a zombie movie that came out in the past 40 years, he probably did the makeup and special effects on it. I'm serious. But also he's been a producer on The Walking Dead for the entirety of its duration. And he's directed many episodes, including some of the most important ones in the entire series, like the finale and Negan's introduction. Greg was initially really unsure about a Daryl Dixon spinoff. As a surprise to no one, these spinoffs were pushed by AMC, not the people who were actually making The Walking Dead. And when he first heard that this was something they wanted, he really wasn't sure about it. But it was actually through discussions with Norman Reedus that he found a place for this show. Norman really likes the idea of a show where Daryl goes from place to place, interacting with people who are living in this post-apocalypse world. He helps them, they help him, and they both walk away from the situation changed. And Greg was like, hell yeah, let's do that. And in the writing process, this show grew to have its own identity. He said, initially both Norman and I had a gut reaction like, ooh, that doesn't feel like The Walking Dead. And then after about 20 seconds, it was like, wait a minute, that's what we want.
Is this gonna be as boring as The Walking Dead?
A valid concern, but the answer is no. This show really does deliver in what it's set out to do. It follows in the footsteps of The Walking Dead, but it manages to stand out as its own original story. The first and last 2 episodes of this 6-episode show attempt to embody vastly different tones throughout it, and they manage to pull it off completely. Episode 2's Cold Open features new character Isabel on the day of the zombie outbreak. It's not zombie because it's The Walking Dead, but you know. During this 7-minute scene, we see stunning shots of Paris, a high-energy clubbing trip sequence, and a slow march into the explosion of chaos that is a zombie outbreak. My god, I love a good outbreak scene. I remember saying to Mac during all of this feels nothing like The Walking Dead, and I love it.
It's a new start of a story with this character that I've been playing for 13 years, and it feels so fresh to me.
If you like Daryl Dixon, but you're sick of The Walking Dead, you'll probably like this show. Unfortunately, episodes 3 and 4 experience a drop in quality compared to the rest of the show. And I think I should point out that they aren't necessarily bad episodes. They provide quite a bit of important context and emotional depth for some of the characters this show has introduced. And I'd also say that some of the most important moments of these episodes are treated as such, like the director just really locked in during those scenes. But these episodes that are competent have the misfortune of being sandwiched between episodes that are extraordinary, which makes them feel really lacking and makes the flaws in them really stand out. The change comes with the writing and directing. These are the first 2 episodes that the showrunner David Zabel does not have a writing credit for. They also bring in a different director for these 2 episodes only. Episode 3's Cold Open shows our main characters going to someone that they think can help them, only to discover that he's too far gone in the crazies to be of any use. He's created an orchestra out of walkers, which looks kinda cool, but also raises a lot of questions about the practicality of this one guy putting all of that together, and living. The scene is ultimately a whole lot of nothing. We don't learn anything about their world, Daryl isn't changed by the experience, and neither is the guy that they encounter. In fact, they just walk out without even saying anything to him. Forcing moments to happen because they would look cool, whether it makes sense or not, is the #1 thing that was holding Dead City back. So this scene made me really nervous. But like I already said, these episodes turned out to be fine, I guess. They just felt really uninspired compared to the rest of the show. That scene I just talked about is as bad as it gets, but there were also so many little moments in these episodes where it just felt like the director was rushing through the shoot. Really, how was that the best take you got? Speaking from experience, not a lot of experience, but enough to know this. When you're working with a really good actor and you give them time and space to become comfortable with the scene and you give them as many takes as they need to get it right, they will deliver. But if you're in a big rush and you go, whatever, we'll use whatever we get on the first couple of takes, and you don't give the actor the time to feel out the scene, it doesn't matter how talented they are, it's gonna turn out poorly. I'm just speculating here, but it feels like this particular director was only on the show for a quick paycheck. There are fully very competent director. There's some fantastic looking shots in here. It really felt like things were rushed. And maybe there was some behind the scenes stuff going on that was forcing him to rush. I don't know. I am just speculating. So sorry, director guy, if you were, really trying here. My fault, bro. But like the ending of episode 4 where Daryl and the kid Laurent were on the boat, it felt like the director just took 2 boat rides. One where he pointed the camera up at the scenery and another where he pointed the camera at the 2 actors and went, look up there, look like you're looking at the scenery. Good, 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 good. Perfect. That's a wrap. Maybe it's because I've been editing too much lately, but this is one of the first scenes I've ever seen where I predicted shot for shot what it was gonna cut to. And it also very awkwardly fade dissolved into the next scene, and it was just clearly, there was no planning between the continuity of the two. I'm really ragging on this right now, but I'm not even mad about it because the rest of the show is so phenomenal that the mediocrity of these two doesn't ruin the whole thing for me. It's just like you just need to be aware there's a little dip, but then we get right back on track with episode 5. A decent amount of episode 5's runtime is dedicated to Daryl's time in America right before he comes over. It's the part of the show that feels the most like The Walking Dead, but it feels like peak Walking Dead, like the good stuff. The writer's understanding of Daryl's character is on full display during this episode. He's smart, he's calculated, and he's a survivalist. He's gonna look out for others as much as he can, as long as it doesn't get in the way of him taking care of himself, until he sees someone take something too far. And then he snaps. So alongside that B-plot, we get this kind of like political drama playing out in our current timeline. The final season of The Walking Dead tried to do a lot of political commentary and say a lot about society and political figures going head to head, and it was really messy and just on the nose and really not my favorite part of the show. But this single episode nailed it. We have hierarchies of power standing on crumbling foundations. We have secrets, we have betrayal, we have sudden violence and war crime, all packed into one little episode. I mean, I guess it's a big episode, not a very small episode. There's a lot going on. It's a big episode. So that was cool, but also Daryl does a cycle of abuse for a minute there. It's a very surprising moment because it's not a side of Daryl that I think we've ever seen on the show before. Like, I know the person he was, like season 1 and 2, is very different from the person he is now. This is like the worst we've seen of him, arguably. And I think it could be up for debate whether it's out of character or not, but for me personally, it did feel true to what was happening in the situation. I feel like the cards were stacked up for this eruption from him to happen pretty perfectly. Even though we as an audience don't feel that he's in too much danger because he's Daryl Dixon, they're not gonna kill him off. His character is stranded in another country, and he's probably up to his limit with nonsense, And this is likely the most on edge that we've ever seen this character, and when the most vulnerable person in the whole show screws him over, I think it makes a lot of sense for this moment to play out the way it does, especially given everything we know about his past with his brother and his father, something that was heavily explored in The Walking Dead and something that was even talked about a little bit in this show. And because of the strength of his character, he's able to pull through and immediately realize his own faults, and I think it played out in a very realistic way. He still did a bad thing and he can't take that back, but he can recognize that and do his best to not repeat those mistakes. I thought it was a good scene. Not yet, but in a moment here I want to talk about the finale, which means I'm going to get into some spoilers, and I'm not going to show any spoilers yet right now because I want to talk about this other thing, which is that AMC spoiled this show for me. Again, you're safe for now. I'm not gonna show it, but AMC showed it to me with this YouTube thumbnail that I'm gonna blur out. Here it is. That's a spoiler. This was posted the day the finale aired. The day to it. Why is every show doing this now? We don't get a second to breathe on any social media platform before spoilers start raining down from the heavens. If you're watching a show as it's coming out and you don't want it to be ruined for you, your option is to turn off your internet. I'm so sick of that. And everyone does this, but I think AMC is particularly horrific with the timing. They announced the Negan and Maggie show before The Walking Dead ended, which meant that any time that they put Negan in a perilous situation, you were just like, okay. And the day the finale, I hadn't even watched the 5th episode yet. I was holding off so I could like binge it all the way through. And then here's the future of the show. Here's a teaser for the next season before you finished this one. All of you cut it out. I'm sick of that. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about finale, which means I'm gonna talk about spoilers, which means you should skip to this timestamp if you don't want those like major spoilers. Like, please. 3, 2, 1. Daryl dies. Oh, he doesn't. This final episode features a sort of redemption for the main antagonist. Daryl killed his brother. It was a self-defense situation, and he's been on the warpath because he's grieving for his brother, and he wants to kill Daryl dead. But when he and his men find Daryl with the kid, the men are like, we gotta kill the kid. You gotta shoot Lukewarm because of orders from the head lady. He can't do that. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't gonna do it. And so he just shoots all of his men and dips on out there. He's like, you guys get out of here, burn your car, we can track it. I'm gonna go be a good guy now. And I personally enjoyed that. I know Mac didn't love this part. We didn't see a whole lot of this character, so this wasn't something that you could have really predicted before the moment it was actually taking place. Because again, he's on the warpath. We see him kill a whole lot of people just trying to get to Daryl. But I would also argue for the same reason that we haven't seen enough to know that this could have happened. We haven't seen enough to know that this couldn't have happened. Like, taking a child's life is a whole nother step in evil, and I think he wasn't ready to go that far. Was maybe even questioning everything he'd done up until this point. Because he doesn't seem stupid either. He probably knows that his brother didn't just get killed by some guy for no reason. He's seeing too much red to really grapple with that. I'm here for this change of heart that he has in this moment. I liked it. There's also this massive internal conflict within Daryl of wanting to get home to his people that he knows are worried sick about him, and not wanting to leave behind this entire brand new group of people that he sees are in trouble and that he knows he can help. He basically has to choose whether to abandon these good people that he's found or abandon his own family. It's not as simple as just doing the right thing, because either way has consequences. And we see that the thing he wants to do most is to get back to his family, and he tries to push away the people around him in order to do that. Not in a horrifically mean way like a lot of bad writers make these situations out to be, but just in a cold and a different way that's really true to Daryl's character, where he's always putting on this tough guy facade. Deep down he cares quite a bit, especially for this kid that he sees is being led down a path of way too much responsibility for a child. And Daryl has a soft spot for kids. He just wants them to live as kids. A lot of them don't get the chance to because of the world they were born into, but Laurent actually could have the opportunity to lead a relatively normal life had he not had all of this responsibility thrust onto him by people who are looking for a scapegoat. There's also this gravestone scene near the end of the episode that, even though this is the heavily warned spoilers section, I don't really want to give too much away of, because I know a lot of people just don't care about spoilers and watch this part anyway, but you should see this for yourself. For one thing, it was a great reminder of how good of an actor Norman Reedus is, and is probably the part of the show that made me feel the most emotional. They're about 12 years into an apocalypse now, and most of these characters don't ever have the time to sit down and grapple with anything that they were dealing with in the old world, the way things used to be. And we watch as a much older, much more mature character, one that we've seen grow through all these years of television, confront something that he probably hasn't confronted in over a decade. And it was a beautiful moment that I really liked. And yeah, we end off with seeing Daryl's most internal struggle become very physical, very literal, as the boat that will take him back to America is coming and Laurent showing up. And it leaves you hanging. It doesn't tell you what he's gonna decide. What does the next season have in store? Carol. It would have been nice if this wasn't spoiled for me by AMC, because in this scene I probably wouldn't have guessed, Carol's about to show up, because I thought Melissa McBride was all done with Carol. But no, I knew as soon as the scene started, okay, this is the part where Carol shows up now. And it's a cool scene. It's Carol being her badass self. She's looking for Daryl. That's what the next season is gonna be, I guess. And I'm not too sure what to make of it. Carol is a miserable character. I love her to death, but I feel like by season 7, probably even sooner, of The Walking Dead, we had had enough of Carol-centric storylines. The early seasons of The Walking Dead, she's a fantastic main character, and I love the Carol-centric stuff. And of course, Look at the Flowers is one of the most tragic things that's ever happened in the show. But as the show goes on and she falls into these vicious cycles that we realize she's probably never going to get herself out of, she becomes much stronger as a supporting character, and there's a lot of emotional turmoil that's caused by her, and it's caused some of the most heartbreaking moments in the whole show to take place. And I love her and I want her to be happy, and I don't think she ever will be. But like I talked about before, the Carol-centric episodes of The Walking Dead in later seasons were just miserable. What does a Carol show gonna do? We know Daryl's in France. There's not really a reasonable way for her to figure that out. Actually, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, maybe it could work. She does have like just enough information to put those pieces together. And maybe she could like sneak onto a boat, kill some guys, and get over there. But still, it's kind of a long shot. I hope that the Book of Carol is really only like 2 to 3 episodes of Carol-centric time before we show up and they're together again. And Daryl is back to being the focus of this show called Daryl Dixon. And I am really worried about what they're gonna do with that. I hope that they're as passionate about bringing Carol back as they were about having a show about Daryl in the first place. I hope for the best. I'm a little optimistic, but very cautiously so. And speaking of all that, when is this Walking Dead franchise thing gonna end?
They're really milking The Walking Dead now, aren't they? I take issue with the word now.
Like I've said before, I'm a Walking Dead super fan. I'm here for a lot of this, but in order to keep these things alive and interesting, there has to be passion behind it. You can't just drag ideas kicking and screaming onto the screen and expect anyone but the most diehard fans to be watching. Like, your numbers are gonna get smaller and smaller as more and more people get sick of the show. If it can happen to Marvel, it can happen to you. And at the end of the day, it just has to be about passion. And that's what I loved about Daryl Dixon. This was a show that was created with not only respect for the character, but an immense amount of passion for telling a new story with him. And I think that if any other shows of this franchise continue forward in this show's footsteps, we might have some really wonderful stories on our hands. But if Rick and Michonne's show is another dead city, I'm gonna lose my mind. You can't rely on just the characters because the novelty is worn up. We've seen the show. 11 seasons of it, in fact. You have to bring something new to the table, and it has to be inspired. If you retread the same plot points and story arcs, it's gonna get real old real quick. I don't know about all this. I will not be watching more Dead City. I will be watching Rick and Michonne's show. I really hope it's really good. And I hope that they understand that one day it has to end. There's so many stories going on with the main characters, it does feel like they could have just continued The Walking Dead. I know it wouldn't have been the same as it is now, like we wouldn't have gotten a Daryl story the way it is, but like imagine if all these stories that I know damn well are eventually going to be interconnected were already interconnected. What? Like, there's a scene in this show where Daryl's radioing back home and Carol goes, is back, and like the name is cut out. He's like, what? Who's back? I don't know who that could be. Is it Rick? Is Rick back already in the timeline where we're at? And like, if Rick's back, how does that intersect with this show? It's gonna become, you're gonna get a Marvel situation where you have to watch 4 shows to know what's going on in the main one. And what's the main one gonna be now that The Walking Dead's over? Anyway, just a lot of fears about the future of the franchise, but there's no sense in worrying now. Maybe it'll all work out. Except for Dead City, that show. And yeah, I really liked this one. This is the best Walking Dead spin-off that they've made so far. It could almost stand alone as its own show. I think the only thing that doesn't make it stand alone is it relies a little bit on you already liking Daryl Dixon. But I feel like even fans who dropped off out of The Walking Dead a long time ago could probably come to this show and be like, hell yeah, Daryl. A lot of understanding his character and his behavior in this show come from past knowledge of Daryl. And I think if you just pick this up out of nowhere, you wouldn't really be rooting for him as hard, but you still have a really nice looking and interesting story to swallow. Are you swallowing? Why would you swallow it? You weirdo. Bottom line is, this was a pretty good show made by some pretty passionate people. And I think that I want to leave you with this quote from the DP on set of, the first and last 2 episodes. The good stuff. He did the camera work for the good stuff. The cinematography. This quote comes from an interview in CBR in which the interviewer asks, "Many shots in the show feel inspired by artwork or classic paintings. Was that intentional at all?" Tommaso Fiorelli responds by highlighting the importance of a good story before going on to say, "I was getting so inspired by what the actors were conveying. At some point, there was something sacred about what they were acting, what they were feeling, the position they had in time and space, and their feelings. It just gives you the will or the intention to do something sacred, like some kind of iconic picture. I was really led by the story and the performances of the actors. In our line of work, we look to be guided by the actors in the story rather than imposing on them our views. So, very often I have a few images like that, which sometimes look like a Caravaggio, but it just happens. We just put the actor there and said, this is it, let's do that, let's shoot that, and that was it.